Hello friends, I'm Sajna Binel. In today's video, I'll tell you what a sprint burndown chart is and how can we plot one. So, a sprint burndown chart is an artifact of a sprint. It shows us the work remaining in a sprint. So, in Agile, we are actually not bothered about how much work has been completed, but we focus more on how much work is remaining in a sprint. So, if you're using a tool like Rally or Jira, the tool will automatically plot the graph for you once the sprint planning meeting is over. But if you are not using a tool, then you have to manually do it either in Excel or using a whiteboard. So let's see how do you plot a sprint burndown chart. So if you look at the slide, the sprint burndown chart has two axes, x-axis and y-axis. The x-axis shows you the total number of days in a sprint, and the y-axis shows you the amount of work in terms of story points or hours. So let's take an example of a 2-week sprint, which makes the sprint duration as 10 days. So that's what I've plotted in the graph that's coming up in the slide, a 10-day sprint. And let's say that your team has estimated the sprint for 140 hours. The total hours estimated by the team is 140. So that's what you can see in the next slide, that the total amount of estimated work is 140 hours and the total number of days in the sprint is 10. Now this ideally makes the amount of work the team should complete in one day as 14 hours, that is 140 divided by 10. Now we have to plot the first line in the graph, which is called the ideal line. In order to plot the ideal line, we will have to compute the work remaining every single day in the sprint. Work remaining on day 1 can be calculated as 140, the total amount of work, minus 14, which will give you 126 hours. So, plotting my graph in that way, this is the ideal line I get. You see, each number plotted on the graph is subtracted by the preceding value. So, 140 minus 14 gives me 126. 126 minus 14 gives me 112. And 112 minus 14 gives me 98. So, every preceding value is subtracted by 14, and that's how I get the ideal line plotted on the graph. So, one thing which is essential to understand is the ideal line shows you only the predicted value. Okay, this is the estimated value, which means that when the sprint starts and your team actually starts doing the work, it is not necessary it will be able to achieve 14 hours on a day-to-day basis. Let's look at the next line. For that, we have the next line coming, that which is called the actual line. So, the actual line of a sprint burndown chart shows you the actual progress of your team while the sprint is going on. For the sake of example, I have taken a few numbers here to plot the actual line. If you look at the graph that's come up in the slide, let's take the example that your team has completed only 5 hours of work on day 1. So, which will make the total work pending on day 1 as 140 minus 5, that is 135 hours. Let's say the next day they were able to put in 11 hours. So, which means on day 2 the number becomes 124. And so on you go on plotting the rest of the values in the actual line. In this graph, the blue line indicates the ideal line which we plotted in the previous slide, and the red line indicates the actual line. So, in a sprint burndown chart, these two lines are very essential in order to track the remaining work in the sprint. Besides this line, some tools like TFS also have a third line called as the capacity line, which is used to understand how do you progress towards a sprint goal. Thank you very much.